여러분, 미국 포틀랜드 먼 길 오셨습니다. 사무엘 아답선 시장님을 박수로 맞이해 주세요.
Thank you. I literally just got off the plane. To the governors and mayors and council chair and other elected officials and distinguished guests, thanks for the opportunity to be here today. If you forget anything else I tell you today, please remember this. Hire and keep really talented governmental staff. Really important. And in the room somewhere is someone who used to work for me that I haven't seen for years. Is Mitsu Yamazaki here? There he is right there. He helped put together, along with the great team at the City of Portland, much of what I'm going to talk about today. Now, I'm going to talk about what happens when your city loses its economic core and what we did in response to that and some of the lessons learned from that effort. I'm going to go by some of these slides very quickly. They're in your printed program. I have more detail on some of these slides of how that happened, but it was for different but similar regions as I understand you're going through. And then I'm going to focus on what we did to prepare and what has happened since we put together a new economic development strategy. So the lessons that we've learned, and I'll come back to these in each of the slides. I apologize that it's in English. It's really important to understand what the bigger needs were for Portland. So economic development, for economic development's sake, was inadequate. Economic development to address the inequities my colleague from Malmo talked about was a key part of what we in Portland also had to do as we transformed our economy. Very important to not just involve government, to not just involve business, but civil society, workers, people who don't work but are consumers. Business is absolutely important to involve, but they can't be the only ones at the table. So where are you going as a city? Where do you want to go? Who needs to be involved with that? And not with government coming to the city with a bunch of data that says this is where you're at. But we actually, luckily, involved people before any data was collected, so we got their input on a baseline. How were we going to describe ourselves at a particular moment down here? And then a vertical approach to economic development, which I'll describe as targeted industries. That is, for us, was an absolutely necessary but painful process. And then a geographic approach among districts. So let's get into this. So Portland through the 80s was, as was the state of Oregon, was a timber, fishing, natural resource-based, agricultural-based economy. Of course, the city of Portland didn't have many farms, but all that agriculture flowed through. We were the largest river port in the city. And when agriculture went down, so did the city of Portland. I grew up on the Oregon coast, and my father was a commercial fisherman. And he lost his boat during this transformation. Timber harvest declined. We just cut down too many trees, and the federal government came in and said, that's enough. We had agriculture at that time, and it has even increased in terms of automation. So a sector that once employed this many people was more productive and employed this many people. Commercial fisheries, we overfished, and there were large trawlers that came in the international waters and also helped with the overfishing. Where the resources that we had, the economic base outside of agricultural, fishing, timber, we did have manufacture, we did have services, and we had a few people that were early into the advanced manufacturing and technology that happened to be living in our area that we benefited from. The state in the 1980s and 90s appropriately, very smartly. It was the right thing to do. Really bet on high tech. Really bet on high tech manufacturing. We were not the Silicon Valley. We didn't do things that, we didn't write software programs. We made things. We made printers. We made chips. Intel's largest fabrication plant for chips is in the Portland region, and their largest research and development department in the world is in the Portland region. Huge benefit, amazing benefit for us to get through this transformation. But the problem is that was outside the city. So it was in the region, but it wasn't in the city of Portland. Did Portland benefit? Absolutely. 40% of the workers at a lot of these companies lived in the city. But then we had issues of commuting. So not a problem, but they weren't, the central city remained very vulnerable. So I was elected mayor 2 months after the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy and Wall Street imploded. And we were losing upwards of 25,000 jobs. Housing prices went down 24%. And because the region was a maker of technology hardware, people stopped buying technology hardware. It was a very brutal time for our city and our region. It was, at various times, the place of highest unemployment in the United States at that time. So, in the midst of the Great Recession, we didn't have the luxury of just planning. We had to act and plan at the same time. And the approach we took was an iterative approach. We're going to try stuff, see if it works. We're not going to bet the whole farm. Sorry for the translators. We're not going to bet everything on any one thing, but we're going to act, we're going to see how it goes, and we're going to keep moving. Sort of learn from high technology in a way. The first thing we did to answer that question about what does the city need, what does the city want, where is the city really, we created the Portland Plan. And we created parts of it and acted on it along the way. And part of that was infused by a climate action plan to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as we rebuilt and restructured our economy. And those two elements went into an economic development plan. The City of Portland's economic development plan in 2008 was 16 years old. It had 13 industries it said it was going to be helping. 13. We didn't have staff to help 13 industries grow. We just didn't. It was like a beauty contest, a popularity contest. And if you were a politician, the politicians on the city council, and I was a chief of staff to the mayor then, probably was like, oh yeah. What's a good one? Beer. Let's put beer on. And if you better put beer on, or you're going to get all the beer makers mad. So what we did with the Portland Plan is we embraced the notion, and it might be different here, but we embraced the notion that we weren't the only government doing work in our city. There are actually 26 different layers of government working in the city of Portland. And our past strategic plans had really been just us. So we were planning for 1 out of 26 governments in the region. For this Portland Plan, strategic plan, we brought them together. That sort of is the, I don't expect you to memorize it, but that's sort of the flow chart that we used, and it broke down to these action items right here. Process continues. The City of Portland has a report card that is 12 metrics. I told staff I want to see it on one piece of paper. And we can update them and change them, but on one piece of paper. This gave me comfort as we rolled out new economic development efforts, that we were, same with the climate action plan, that as we were going to try to reinvent ourselves economically, that we had what the city needed in the background of our heads. This is sort of our efforts on climate action plan. So, as I mentioned before, we took a targeted industry approach, sort of that vertical approach. When we had discretionary money and time to invest in something proactive, where were we going to invest it economically? That previous economic development plan had 13 different industries. We didn't have money to do 13 industries. We had money to do probably 4 sectors. And then, how are you going to help neighborhood business, Main Street businesses, businesses that weren't a target industry but still very important? How are you going to help them sort of horizontally? Our target industry approach, Portland is unique in the United States that over 95% of Portland's businesses have fewer than 50 employees. There isn't a city in the United States, and Portland is the 23rd, 24th largest city in the United States, that has as high a percentage of its workforce working for what the United States federal government calls micro enterprises. It's part of the reason why in that recession we were hit so hard, because small businesses get hit hard in national recessions. But the upside is nearly 3/4 of the jobs created in Portland on any given year are created by those small businesses. So what can we do with the big businesses and small businesses to help them succeed? We took an economic development approach, and the thing that we did, and this is where Mitsu and the staff were far smarter than I was, is we did an analysis of looking at what Portland's strengths were economically, business-wise, not our tourism slogans, but what did we make in terms of services or products that had the greatest opportunity to grow with exports. So the greatest opportunity to grow with exports and in markets that we had access to. So New Zealand, might be a market for us for some things, might not. So we looked at strengths, inherent strengths that were probably undersized, economic strengths where there was not a lot of exports, and we had to see a latent market, a potential market for those targeted industries. So the first one, now we're getting into the 4. The first one is building on that legacy of advanced manufacturing that we talked about. So it's metals and machinery. Portland has, and one thing we did to support this with our tax base, because it's not all about money, it's also about talent, workforce talent, but it's a lot about money. And so we don't tax the profits of businesses. We don't tax the profitable export sales of businesses that are located in the city of Portland. If they sell in the city of Portland something, we tax it. If they sell it in Canada, we don't tax it. That was part of our commitment to manufacturing and to public services. So we doubled down on the existing manufacturing that we had, and in some cases what they said, many of these corporations, what they said is they needed help training the new workforce for an automated manufacturing process. And frankly, those companies, what would work for Precision Cast Parks for that training would also work for Gunderson. So there was this common training need that government was a partner to help fill. This is the organization that we put together, the Organ Manufacturers Association, and an annual summit where we set goals for the year, who's going to do what, and we move forward. The Portland region is home. The second is activewear and outdoor. The Portland region is home headquarters to Nike, just outside the city. In the city is the North American headquarters for Adidas, Keen, and there are actually about 400 outdoor and apparel manufacturing companies or design companies in Portland or the Portland region. And they pay well, and they're small, so they could use help for export and technical assistance. Activewear and outdoor, second targeted industry. And even though Nike gets a lot of and Columbia Sportswear, big names, like I said, a whole bunch of them were small. They were suppliers to Nike. They were suppliers to some of the larger firms. Green cities. So Portland is consistently ranked as the greenest city in the United States. And the reason for that is we have at one time had the highest percentage of sustainable buildings that did not use a lot of energy. We could only hope to be as sustainable as Malmo one day, but did not use a lot of energy and were good to the employees, good for the environment. The firms that were headquartered in Portland were just working on local projects. And our partnership with them was to get them work elsewhere. So within 4 years of putting this together, 3 of our firms opened offices in China, 2 of them opened offices in Canada, and this export of our talent, while keeping the headquarters in Portland, proved to be very successful for architects, for building engineers, and for the fact that they were, unlike at that time a lot of firms that says we're green, they could point to buildings in the city of Portland as a living lab that they had actually designed and built. And we market it as we build green cities, Portland. Technology and media speaks for itself. This is the software cluster. The person who invented Linux is from Portland, so our specialty within software is open source. We had a problem with access to capital for these small firms. So these are some of the things we did to help all the targeted industries and local industries. We put money into a seed fund. It was then matched by private sector contributions, and we started making loans to these small businesses that could be forgiven if they were successful. We created nonprofits and trade associations if they didn't already exist. So like the Technology Association of Oregon already exists, but TechTown PDX, which was a public-private partnership, helped the industry become more racially diverse and more inclusive of women in the tech field. This is quickly the geographic approach. So we have an amazing, as I mentioned, amazing number of people working in small businesses spread across the city, but there are parts of the city doing better than others. And so we created neighborhood improvement districts that for the first time we invested in. The money that was made in those districts stayed in those districts. The property taxes that increased above a certain threshold stayed in those districts, and those were used for what that local business, set of businesses and neighbors thought they needed in order to become more economically viable. The Neighborhood Prosperity Network has helped now those poorest districts in Portland to really address some of their foundational problems, and it's been very successful. Here's an example of the existing ones. But as we also sought to reimagine our neighborhoods, we also developed an eco-district approach so that they're rebuilding, they're renewing, but they're doing it with the most cutting-edge sustainable practices and equity practices. And this just gives you some of the strategies for doing that. So again, the key takeaways, and in this sense, the takeaways, lessons learned are we put a lot of effort into trying to research and get insight to what was really going on in the city of Portland economically. But looking back, we could have even done more. Some surprising things came out of that. The number one export from the region, so the big region, by value came from one company, Intel. The number one export from the city proper, so not the region, but the city proper, was scrap metal. We were kind of surprised by that. We thought it would be something more glamorous, but that was a place we had to start. And so that metals energy, the metals targeted industry is an example of sort of getting the sobering statistics we needed in order to fashion a strategy that we has made great progress. The monitoring, the challenges of monitoring when a mayor, so I was mayor up until 2012. When the new regime comes in, they often want to forget everything that the old regime did. But the Portland plan was passed by the city council. It wasn't just Mayor Sam Adams. And so that has endured and changed as well as it should be, but it has endured because doing anything by mayor alone and not city council approval, it just gets washed away too quickly. The baseline research on where your new markets are was also very sobering for us. We did a lot of good things, but our baseline showed people didn't want to buy it. So how are you going to move your economy forward that has to have a large amount of exports as part of it? And then on the districts, we learned that while we're busy, putting together our 4 targeted industries, you might have a breakout business because of the leadership of that business, or just because it was a great idea, not in your targeted industry. And we didn't staff up for that possibility. And looking back, now the city has staffed up because there's some great companies that are becoming sort of super regional and national companies. They weren't our targeted industry, but we need to get behind them, and the city is doing that now. So those are some of the lessons learned. It's been a great journey. This process, even though I ended my term retired in 2012, is still growing strong for the city. The city of Portland, and it's not just because of this, has had one of the strongest recoveries of any region in the United States, and they're now in the process of updating this plan, but keeping the idea and the approach intact. Thank you.